Imagine a man so rich and powerful that he could twist the arm of Congress, make presidents tremble, silence critics in the press, and dictate the price of the lifeblood of America's economy with the stroke of a pen. This man wasn't a king or a warlord. He wasn't elected, nor did he inherit an empire. He built it, piece by piece, with nothing more than a fierce discipline, a ruthless strategy, and an obsession with control. His name? John D. Rockefeller. At the height of his power, Rockefeller's company, Standard Oil, controlled nearly 90% of all oil refined in the United States. That's more control over a vital resource than any modern billionaire has ever held, not Musk, not Bezos, not Gates. But Rockefeller's story is not one of simple success. It's a tale of blood and fortune, where ambition collided with morality, where generosity was shadowed by ruthless greed, and where a poor boy from upstate New York became the richest man in American history. The story you're about to hear is not just about one man, it's about the birth of modern capitalism, the dark secrets of power, and how one empire reshaped the destiny of a nation. Welcome to the untold story of Rockefeller's empire. John Davison Rockefeller entered the world on July 8, 1839, in a modest farmhouse in Richford, New York. His beginnings could not have been more unassuming. He was the second of 6 children, born into a family constantly balancing between survival and instability. His father, William Avery Rockefeller, was a man of schemes and shadows. Locals called him Devil Bill, and for good reason. He was a traveling salesman who posed as Dr. William Livingston, peddling miracle cures and phony elixirs to unsuspecting farmers. He lived a double life, maintaining multiple families across different towns and leaving trails of betrayal behind him. To young John, his father was a lesson in cunning, how manipulation could bend people to your will, but also a warning of what recklessness and deceit could bring. In sharp contrast stood his mother, Eliza Davison Rockefeller, a devout Baptist with a backbone of steel. She raised her children with discipline, thrift, and strict religious values. She preached honesty, prayer, and restraint, teaching John to save every penny and to live a life guided by purpose. Even as a boy, Rockefeller displayed traits that would later define him. At just 12 years old, he was lending money to neighbors at interest, recording every transaction in a little ledger book he carried with pride. When other children played games, John studied numbers and dreamed of business. At 16, he secured his first real job as a bookkeeper in Cleveland, earning just 50 cents a day. It was a humble wage, but Rockefeller treated it like a fortune. He tracked every cent meticulously, building a habit of discipline that would stay with him for life. This young bookkeeper was already different. Where others saw limitation, Rockefeller saw opportunity. Where others spent, he saved. Where others gambled, he calculated. He wasn't born into power, but he was building the mindset of a man who would one day control an empire. By the mid-19th century, America was hungry for light. Whale oil had long been the primary fuel for lamps, but it was expensive and supply was dwindling. Candles were common, but they couldn't meet the growing needs of an industrializing nation. Then came kerosene, a new fuel distilled from crude oil. It was cheap, efficient, and suddenly in demand everywhere. For most men, the oil boom looked like a gold rush. Thousands of speculators rushed to Pennsylvania, digging wells and dreaming of instant riches. But Rockefeller saw something others missed: drilling was risky, unstable, and expensive. Striking oil was as much about luck as it was about skill. But refining, turning that crude into kerosene and other byproducts, was where the real money was. In 1863, at just 24 years old, Rockefeller partnered with Samuel Andrews, an inventor with refining expertise, and invested in his first oil refinery in Cleveland. From the very beginning, Rockefeller approached the business differently. He was obsessed with efficiency. Where competitors wasted crude oil by dumping byproducts like gasoline, tar, and paraffin, Rockefeller found ways to profit from every drop. Gasoline-powered machines, tar was sold to construction companies, and paraffin was turned into candles. Even the waste from his refineries made money. This philosophy became his signature: nothing wasted, everything optimized. His relentless drive to cut costs gave him an edge. He negotiated with suppliers ruthlessly, demanded discounts for bulk purchases, and reinvested profits instead of spending them. By the late 1860s, Rockefeller's refineries were the largest in Cleveland, and his ambition was growing. He didn't just want to compete, he wanted to dominate. To him, competition wasn't healthy, it was wasteful. He believed that one company should bring order to the chaos of the oil market. That company, he decided, would be his. And so began the empire of Standard Oil. In 1870, Rockefeller took the most decisive step of his career. He founded the Standard Oil Company. To the public, it seemed like just another corporation. But behind the name was a vision unlike anything the business world had ever seen. Standard Oil wasn't created to compete, it was designed to conquer. Rockefeller understood that the oil industry was chaotic, filled with wildcat drillers and unstable refiners cutting each other's throats for scraps of profit. He believed this chaos was wasteful and inefficient. To him, the solution was simple: to eliminate the competition, consolidate the industry, and create one standard of oil that would dominate the market. Rockefeller's genius wasn't just in efficiency, it was in strategy. He struck secret deals with the railroads, securing rebates and even drawbacks, meaning for every barrel a competitor shipped, the railroad secretly paid Standard Oil a cut. This gave him an almost unbeatable advantage: his oil was transported cheaper than anyone else's, allowing him to slash prices until rivals were forced to sell out or go bankrupt. And when Rockefeller approached competitors, he gave them a chilling choice: join us or be crushed. Many gave in, realizing there was no escape from Standard Oil's grip. Within a decade, Rockefeller's empire expanded like wildfire. By 1880, Standard Oil controlled nearly 90% of refining capacity in the United States. That level of control is almost unthinkable today. His empire touched every corner of American life: kerosene lamps lit homes, trains carried his barrels across the nation, and his profits grew to levels no one had ever seen. To Rockefeller, this wasn't ruthless. It was order. In his mind, he was bringing stability and reliability to an industry plagued by chaos. But to his enemies, he was becoming something darker: a monopolist, a tyrant, and the first true robber baron of America. By the 1880s, John D. Rockefeller was no longer just a businessman, he was the embodiment of power itself. Standard Oil had grown into a corporate giant, and with its dominance came unimaginable wealth. Adjusted for today, Rockefeller's fortune peaked at over $400 billion, making him the richest man in modern history, far surpassing Musk, Bezos, or Gates. His influence stretched beyond oil. He could sway railroad companies, influence newspapers with his advertising dollars, and quietly shape the decisions of politicians. Cities dependent on Standard Oil's products practically bowed to his empire. And yet, despite this colossal fortune, Rockefeller lived with surprising restraint. He was deeply religious, rarely indulged in lavish parties, and dressed plainly compared to the flamboyant millionaires of the Gilded Age. Where others flaunted wealth with golden mansions and diamond-studded canes, Rockefeller invested in control, efficiency, and expansion. He believed his fortune was a sign of divine approval, that God had chosen him to bring order to the oil industry. This belief gave him an almost unshakable sense of righteousness, even when his methods destroyed competitors and ruined families. To the public, Rockefeller was a paradox. On one hand, he made kerosene so affordable that even the poorest households could light their homes at night. He turned darkness into light for millions. On the other, he was painted as a ruthless monopolist, a man who strangled competition, manipulated markets, and built his empire on intimidation. Political cartoons of the era showed him as a king, a tyrant, even an octopus whose tentacles reached into every facet of American life. Rockefeller had become more than a businessman, he was a symbol of the Gilded Age, an age of extreme wealth, extreme inequality, and extreme power. By the 1890s, Rockefeller's empire had grown so vast that public resentment could no longer be ignored. Standard Oil dominated refining, transport, and distribution to such an extent that it seemed unstoppable. To the American public, this was no longer just business, it was tyranny disguised as progress. Journalists, known as muckrakers, began to expose the inner workings of his empire. Among the most influential was Ida Tarbell, whose 1904 expose revealed the ruthless strategies Rockefeller used to crush competitors, secure railroad rebates, and manipulate the market. Her work painted a picture of a man whose ambition stopped at nothing, a master of leverage, secrecy, and intimidation. The public was shocked. Families and small businesses that had once competed in the oil industry were now bankrupt, while Standard Oil reaped astronomical profits. Pressure mounted on both local and federal governments. Politicians who had once been silent now faced constituents demanding action. Reformers decried monopolies as dangerous to democracy, warning that unchecked wealth could bend the nation to the will of a single man. In response, the federal government launched antitrust investigations, culminating in the 1911 Supreme Court ruling that Standard Oil violated the Sherman Antitrust Act and had to be broken into 34 separate companies. To many, this seemed like justice. The empire that had dominated the nation for decades was finally dismantled. Yet, Rockefeller had played the long game. He owned stock in all 34 companies, which soared in value after the breakup. In a twist of irony, what appeared to be the downfall of Standard Oil only made Rockefeller richer than ever. The man who had once controlled nearly the entire oil market now had diversified holdings across multiple entities, each flourishing independently. To the public, it was a victory against monopolies. To Rockefeller, it was yet another demonstration of his ability to turn any challenge into opportunity. His empire had been tested and had adapted, proving the unmatched resilience of his vision and strategy. Beneath the veneer of Rockefeller's public persona, the disciplined, devout, and philanthropic billionaire lay a network of ruthless strategies and shadow dealings that few dared to expose. Standard Oil's rise was not solely the product of efficiency and vision, it was built on tactics that left devastation in its wake. Competitors who refused to cooperate faced crushing price wars, intimidation, and sometimes legal manipulation. Entire family businesses vanished overnight, swallowed by Rockefeller's relentless expansion. Workers in his refineries endured long hours under hazardous conditions, often with little pay. While the lamps Rockefeller supplied brightened American homes, the human cost behind that light was rarely acknowledged. Even his charitable work carried a double edge. Rockefeller gave hundreds of millions to education, medicine, and religious institutions, but critics argued that this philanthropy was carefully calibrated to cleanse the reputation of a man whose empire had been forged through manipulation and force. Some historians suggest that every public donation, every library or university he funded, was a strategic move to create a moral shield around a man whose business practices were often ruthless. Yet, it wasn't simply greed driving him. Rockefeller believed deeply in order, in discipline, and in bringing stability to chaotic systems. To him, his methods were justified, even noble. The paradox of Rockefeller is what makes his story so compelling. He was a visionary who transformed an industry, made essential goods affordable, and left a legacy that shaped modern corporate America. At the same time, he was a monopolist who wielded power with little restraint, crushing livelihoods, manipulating markets, and bending politics in his favor. His life forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about morality, wealth, and the cost of power. Can extraordinary fortune coexist with ethical leadership? Was Rockefeller a genius guided by a moral compass, or a man whose ambition eclipsed any consideration for human consequence? In exploring the untold story of John D. Rockefeller, we see that history is rarely black and white, and that behind every great fortune, there may lie shadows as deep as the wealth it produces. As Rockefeller aged, he turned more intentionally toward philanthropy, reshaping his public image from ruthless industrialist to generous benefactor. Over the course of his life, he donated more than $500 million, an almost unimaginable sum in the early 20th century. His contributions funded schools, churches, libraries, and hospitals, and he created institutions that continue to influence the world today, including the University of Chicago and the Rockefeller Foundation. The foundation played a pivotal role in advancing medical research, eradicating diseases such as hookworm, and improving public health on a global scale. For many, these contributions painted a picture of a man deeply committed to societal betterment, a stark contrast to the cutthroat tycoon of his earlier years. Yet even philanthropy could not erase the shadows of his empire. Critics argued that his charitable acts were strategic, a calculated effort to cleanse a reputation built on monopolistic dominance. The immense fortune that allowed him to give so generously was itself the product of practices that left countless families and small businesses destroyed. In essence, every school or hospital he funded could be seen as both a gift and a subtle reminder of the power that had enabled it. Rockefeller understood this duality. He used philanthropy as a tool not only to contribute to society but to shape it in ways that extended his influence beyond the business world. Despite the controversy, his legacy is undeniable. Rockefeller's approach to giving formalized modern philanthropy, inspiring future generations of billionaires to donate systematically and strategically. His life story continues to provoke debate. Was he a visionary who brought structure, efficiency, and opportunity to American industry, or a man whose relentless pursuit of wealth came at an enormous moral and social cost? Perhaps he was both. In examining Rockefeller's philanthropy alongside his business tactics, we see a man who understood that power and wealth are not just resources, they are levers capable of reshaping society itself. His legacy, therefore, is complex, enduring, and reflective of the very paradox that defined his life. John D. Rockefeller's story is not just a relic of the Gilded Age, it is a blueprint for modern capitalism. The companies that emerged from the breakup of Standard Oil, including ExxonMobil, Chevron, and BP, remain global powerhouses, controlling markets, influencing policy, and generating billions in revenue. Rockefeller's strategies of consolidation, market control, and strategic philanthropy are mirrored in today's tech giants. Amazon, Google, Facebook, and Tesla all employ similar principles: monopolistic expansion, vertical integration, and calculated public image cultivation. In this way, Rockefeller's influence stretches across centuries, illustrating how the lessons of the 19th century continue to shape the 21st. His life also sparks enduring debates about wealth and morality. Modern society still grapples with questions Rockefeller posed through example: how much power should one individual wield? Is it ethical to dominate markets if it brings efficiency and innovation? Can philanthropy erase the moral consequences of monopolistic practices? In the age of billionaires and global corporations, these questions are more relevant than ever. Rockefeller's empire was a case study in both the potential and the peril of concentrated wealth. He demonstrated how extraordinary fortune can fuel innovation, infrastructure, and societal progress, but also how it can consolidate power, exacerbate inequality, and manipulate politics. Moreover, Rockefeller's story underscores the duality of legacy. His charitable foundations continue to save lives, advance research, and educate millions, while the corporate structures he built remain symbols of monopolistic power. For investors, entrepreneurs, and historians, the lessons are clear: wealth and influence carry enormous responsibility, and even the most visionary strategies can leave behind a complex web of consequences. By studying Rockefeller, we see the blueprint for ambition, foresight, and influence, and the shadow side that comes with it. The echoes of his empire remain visible in boardrooms, oil pipelines, stock markets, and even the philanthropic agendas of today's billionaires, proving that history's lessons are never truly in the past. John D. Rockefeller's life is a story of extremes, from humble beginnings in a small New York farmhouse to controlling the lifeblood of America's economy. He was a man of contradictions, a disciplined, religious philanthropist who also orchestrated one of the most powerful monopolies in history. His empire reshaped industries, transformed lives, and forced the nation to confront uncomfortable truths about wealth, power, and morality. The question remains: was Rockefeller a visionary who brought order, efficiency, and progress, or a ruthless monopolist whose ambition left scars on countless lives? Perhaps he was both, a complex figure whose impact cannot be measured simply in dollars or philanthropy. What makes Rockefeller's story timeless is its relevance today. The echoes of his empire can be seen in the strategies of today's billionaires, in the dominance of global corporations, and in the ongoing debates over monopolies, corporate responsibility, and wealth inequality. He demonstrated that extraordinary ambition, disciplined strategy, and relentless pursuit of opportunity could reshape society itself. At the same time, his life is a cautionary tale: unchecked power, even when cloaked in innovation and philanthropy, can create moral and social consequences that ripple through generations. His empire was built on efficiency and brilliance, but also on exploitation and fear, leaving a legacy as paradoxical as it is instructive. As we reflect on Rockefeller's story, we are forced to ask the hard questions: how much power should any one person have? At what cost does fortune come? Can wealth be a force for good if its origins are built on dominance and control? These are questions that resonate in boardrooms, political halls, and philanthropic foundations today. John D. The Rockefeller's life is the ultimate illustration of blood and fortune, the intertwined paths of ambition, power, and consequence. His story reminds us that behind every great empire, there are untold sacrifices, hidden schemes, and moral dilemmas waiting to be uncovered.